With a bellowing roar, the armored colossus crashed into the alien line, 30-foot-long biosteel claws, tearing Pakled soldiers limb from limb as hot blood sprayed the steaming jungle flora. Roger Henderson smiled grimly, pulse rifle locked on Vox's bulbous insectoid head, as the Pakled commander gaped in abject horror at the rampaging beast. What is that thing? Vox clicked, staggering back as another monster erupted from the dense foliage nearby with an earth-shaking howl. Humanity's ace in the hole. Roger spat blood, wiping his filthy, stubbled face with a shredded sleeve. Titan-class combat bioforms, engineered, trained, and very, very pissed off. All around them, more behemoths rose from the shadows, reptilian, mammalian, and everything between. Vox's multifaceted eyes darted between them in pure existential dread. The human soldier's smirk widened into a savage grin. We call them our fuck you button. Last resort when some dumb alien shits think they can take our worlds. Well, Zephyr 6 is ours, bug. Surrender now or your whole fucking species gets turned into biomass. Vox's clawed hands shook as he lowered his plasma caster. Behind him, his soldiers screamed as they were crushed and devoured by the ever-growing horde of human warbeasts. The monsters were everywhere, tearing through Pakled flesh, shrugging off plasma bolts, unstoppable. It's over. Call off your fleets or we let the big boys off the leash. Roger leveled his rifle at Vox's skull ridge, eyes hard as tritanium. These are just the runts. You do not want to see the nasty ones. The ground shook with the impacts of mountains of genetically engineered killing muscle. Roars blotted out the jungle sounds. Blue ichor mixed with the red of human blood. The standoff had become a rout, and then a massacre. And Roger knew the same scene was playing out on 100 distant battlefields that very moment. Countless frontier worlds where desperate humans were making their final stand against the Pakled menace, only to watch in awe as their monster shock troops entered the fray. The invasion was over before it truly began. As quickly as the behemoths had been unleashed, the Pakled were broken and fleeing, little more than scattered remnants to be wiped out by the vengeful victors. Because when humanity finally let slip the beasts of war, the Pakled didn't stand a chance in hell. Extinction was the only mercy. Vox slammed the glowing Pakled control runes, shimmering light enveloping his form, as the Titan-class combat bioform's crushing jaws snapped shut on empty air. He stumbled as he rematerialized on the command deck of the Pakled flagship, the orbiting warship, his last hope. All weapons maximum yield fire. Scour that planet's surface until nothing remains but glass, Vox screeched, froth flecking his trembling mandibles. The weapons officers rushed to obey, priming plasma lances and singularity missiles. Proximity klaxons suddenly wailed, sensor screens flashing red with incoming threat warnings. The crew froze, compound eyes widening in disbelief at the impossible readings. Sensors must be malfunctioning. Run diagnostics on... The command died on Vox's lips as the forward view screen filled with mind-shattering horror. Stretching kilometers long, a eyeless serpentine abomination, flesh pulsing with coiled malice, maw yawning impossibly wide to reveal gyrating rings of blade-like teeth, bore down on the Pakled flagship with hideous alien speed. Armor scales rippled over taut musculature as its gaping jaws crunched into the reinforced prow, impossibly sharp fangs ripping through titanium hull plates, structural force fields flaring and popping. Vox could only watch, mandibles slack, as the serpent's writhing bulk smashed deeper into the flagship's body, decks collapsing, bulkheads crumpling, unfortunate crewmen pulped by the monster's thrashing impact. Vital systems exploded in showers of sparks, the lights flickering as main power failed. Vox bolted for the escape pods, shoving past panicking crew. Clambering into the final pod, he slammed the emergency launch, the small craft blasting away from the doomed ship, just as the ravenous serpent's fanged skull erupted through the command deck in a hellish spray of flame and debris. The pod streaked towards the nearest colony world, Vox's heart's hammering, every fiber of his being craving the safety of planetary defense cannons and garrison troops. The pod jolted as it touched down, Vox staggering out, sprinting towards the looming Ferrocrete command bunker. Behind him, the earth suddenly heaved. Vox stumbled, mandibles quivering in pure dread, to see a gargantuan crustacean erupting from the ground in a roaring cascade of dirt and stone. Countless barbed, jointed legs slammed down, propelling the monster forward as it smashed into the colony's outer walls. Huge scything talons slicing through durasteel and concrete like paper. The bunker's defense cannons swiveled and opened fire, blasts hammering into the beast's monstrous carapace to no effect, ricocheting wildly. It barely slowed, multiple legs unfolding, slamming into the bunker like organic pile drivers, ferrocrete crumbling. The muffled shrieks of command staff suddenly silenced as the structure collapsed under the creature's bulk. Above, the sky darkened with the shadows of winged horrors, diving on the colony in shrieking swarms. Soldiers, civilians, structures, all were ripped apart with appalling ease, the monsters' shrieking cries drowning the screams of their victims. All reason, all strategy fled Vox's mind, only blind panic and the primal urge to flee remaining. Mandibles clacking helplessly, he scrambled away from the crumbling ruin of the colony, a single question pounding mercilessly in his whirling thoughts. Where in the eternal void did the humans get these fucking monsters? The scene shifts, the flames of battle replaced by the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. Years earlier, in the bowels of a top-secret research facility deep beneath the Earth's surface, a younger Roger Henderson stood before a massive containment tank. Its reinforced glass walls held back a bubbling tide of luminescent green fluid, within which a monstrous form twitched and pulsed as it grew. A web of tubes and wires fed the beast, pumping nutrients and growth stimulants into its rapidly expanding bulk. The click of heels on concrete announced the arrival of Dr. Emilia Novak, the lead scientist of Project Leviathan. Her face, normally alight with the thrill of discovery, was lined with tension as she approached Roger. "Colonel Henderson, I must voice my concerns about the war mounts." Her tone was clipped, professional, but an undercurrent of unease ran beneath the words. While their combat potential is undeniable, their behavior is erratic, unpredictable. We can't be certain they'll remain under our control. Roger turned to face her, his jaw set. "Doctor, these beasts are our only hope against the Pakled. We've all seen the projections. Without a game-changer, humanity will be overrun within a decade. The war mounts are that game-changer." "Are acceptable." Roger cut her off, his voice brooking no argument. "We're out of time and options. Accelerate the growth process and begin mass production immediately. That's an order." Dr. Novak's lips thinned, but she nodded curtly. "Yes, sir, but I must insist on additional testing and safety protocols. We're playing with forces we barely understand." "We understand enough. We can't afford to let fear hold us back, not with our survival on the line." Roger turned back to the tank, watching as the creature within began to stir, its eyes glowing an eerie red through the murky fluid. "Do what you must, but do it quickly. We need those war mounts on the front lines yesterday." The scene shifts again, a montage of images flashing by. Dozens of tanks, then hundreds, each containing a unique nightmare made flesh. Human soldiers training alongside the beasts, learning to ride them, to direct their fury against hapless target drones. The creatures growing, evolving, their forms ever more monstrous and deadly. Through it all, Roger watched with grim satisfaction. But Dr. Novak's unease only grew, her warnings becoming more insistent with each passing day. She confronted Roger in his office, a tablet clutched in white-knuckled hands. "The latest brain scans confirm it. The war mount's neural chemistry is highly unstable. Aggression levels are spiking, and there's evidence of resistance to the control implants." She thrust the tablet towards him, the data painting a chilling picture. "If we continue at this pace, there's a very real chance they could turn on us." Roger barely glanced at the screen, his eyes hard. "You're letting your own fears cloud your judgment, Doctor. We're on the verge of a breakthrough that could save billions of lives. I won't let you jeopardize that." "Colonel, please, you have to listen." "I've heard enough." Roger stood towering over the scientist. "As of this moment, you are relieved of duty. Security will escort you off the base." Dr. Novak's face drained of color. "You can't do this. If we don't stop now, it may be too late." But Roger had already turned away, signaling to the guards outside. They entered, seizing Dr. Novak by the arms as she struggled and pleaded. "Colonel Henderson, please, you're making a terrible mistake. The Warmounts will be our doom." Her desperate cries echoed down the hallway as she was dragged away, the heavy door slamming shut behind her with a resounding clang. Roger turned back to the live feed from the Warmount pens, watching as the monstrous creatures thrashed and roared. His eyes glinted with a determined light. One way or another he would win this war, no matter the cost. Vox staggered through the hidden entrance of the underground research facility, clutching his mangled arm. Crimson ichor dripped from a dozen wounds, splattering the polished floor. Alarms blared and scientists scrambled as he burst into the central lab, eyes wild. "Unleash the Devourer strain, now!" he roared, slamming a fist on the nearest console. The lead scientist, Zaxol, gaped at him in horror. "Commander, no! The Devourer is untested, highly volatile. We can't control it." "I don't need to control it," Vox snarled, shoving the protesting scientist aside and entering the release codes himself. "I just need it to kill." In the reinforced containment chamber, a writhing mass of oily black tendrils stirred to wakefulness. It slammed against the transparent polymer walls, leaving spiderwebs of cracks. Zaxol backed away, mandibles quivering. With a hiss of pressurized gas, the chamber door slid open. The Devourer surged forth in a tide of thrashing obsidian hunger, pseudopods lashing out indiscriminately. A luckless guard was enveloped, chitin and ichor dissolving as he was torn apart at the molecular level. In seconds, only a puddle of hissing sludge remained. Vox laughed, a jagged, desperate sound as he watched the Devourer pour into the tunnels, seeking the surface and the hated humans above. Klaxons erupted from Roger's wristcom as he directed a Titan-class armored mammoth against a stubborn knot of pack-led reinforcements. He glanced at the flickering screen, eyes widening as impossible biosensor readings scrolled past. "All units fall back to the evac points immediately," he barked into the comm, already sprinting for the nearest landing zone. "The bugs have unleashed some kind of bioweapon. Repeat, fall back." But it was already too late. Across the battlefield, a tsunami of grasping ebony tendrils burst from the ground, enveloping everything in its path. Men screamed as the Devourer's touch stripped flesh from bones in agonizing moments. The smaller Warmounts vanished into the onrushing tide of black, while larger ones bellowed in agony, thrashing futilely as the Devourer wormed into their flesh, devouring them from within. Ichor sprayed and bones cracked, monsters crumbling like rotten fruit. Roger watched in numb horror as the Devourer obliterated his forces. Soldiers, beasts, it mattered not. Anything organic was fuel for the insatiable hunger. He keyed the evac code into his emergency beacon, signaling the orbiting fleet. "All forces retreat. Zephyr 6 is lost. Get out while you still can." Dropships swooped down, hatchways yawning as Roger's surviving troops clambered aboard, fighting off grasping tendrils. As the ships blasted for orbit, Roger stared at the carnage below. The Devourer spread with appalling speed, an unstoppable wave of ravenous darkness. He clenched his fists, glaring at the roiling surface that had once been a prosperous colony. The beasts had delivered them victory over the Packlet, but at what cost? What horrors had they unleashed in their desperation? In the frantic rush of the evacuation, Vox slithered aboard one of the fleeing human ships, his hatred for Roger and all humanity driving him like a white-hot brand. As the vessel streaked through the void, Vox lurked in the shadows, his claws tearing at exposed wiring, his mandibles dripping corrosive saliva onto vital systems. The ship bucked and shuddered, sparks spraying from overloaded circuits as critical components failed one by one. With a bone-jarring impact, the crippled ship slammed down onto the rocky surface of a lifeless moon. Roger and his battered troops staggered out, leaving a handful of guards to watch over the vessel while they assessed the damage. Vox seized his moment, bursting from the shadows in a whirlwind of ripping claws and snapping jaws. The guards fell in sprays of blood, their screams cut short as Vox tore out their throats. Chittering with malicious glee, Vox slammed a clawed fist into the ship's distress beacon, the signal pulsing out into the void. Within moments, the looming shadow of a pack-led battle cruiser fell over the moon as it descended like a monstrous bird of prey. Roger spun, eyes widening as he saw the cruiser's guns swiveling to target them. "Ambush! Take cover and return fire!" The humans scrambled for the scant shelter of the moon's craggy terrain as the pack-led opened fire, plasma bolts searing the air and exploding into the dusty ground. Pack-led warriors swarmed from the ship in a chittering tide, Vox at their head, plasma rifles spitting deadly streams of energy. The humans gave as good as they got, their own weapons barking as they cut down the front ranks of the charging pack-led, but for every insectoid soldier that fell, a dozen more surged forward, heedless of the mounting casualties. Roger keyed his comm. "Warmounts front and center, plow the road." From the rear of the human lines, two massive behemoths thundered forward, their armored hides glistening in the sun. Rhinoceros-like, their snouts bristled with cruel horns as they crashed into the packled ranks like living battering rams. Packled troops splattered beneath trampling feet, agonized shrieks filling the air as wickedly sharp horns found flesh and chitin. Vox screeched with fury. "Concentrate fire on the beasts, bring them down!" Pack-led rifles swiveled, pouring streams of searing plasma into the Warmount's armored flanks. One of the behemoths staggered, smoke rising from its seared flesh, emerald ichor oozing from a score of wounds. But still it fought on, goring pack-led and shaking off the clinging soldiers like a dog shakes off fleas. Vox snarled. The battle was turning against him. He had to act now, or all would be lost. His eyes locked on Roger, a cruel smile twisting his mandibles. Reaching to his belt, he primed a pair of plasma grenades, their indicators pulsing an ominous red. With a shriek of pure hatred, Vox charged at Roger, the grenades glowing like hellish stars in his clawed fists. Roger saw him coming and leapt to meet him head-on, rifle raised. The two collided like crashing meteors, Roger smashing his rifle butt into Vox's skull-plated head as the pack-led commander lashed out with his claws, ripping into Roger's combat armor. They rolled across the rocky ground, punching, clawing, two nemeses locked in a final mortal battle as the conflict raged around them in a storm of blood and fire. Locked together, Roger and Vox slammed into the cracked buckling ground, a tangle of straining limbs and snapping jaws. Jagged stones dug into Roger's back as he wrestled with the pack-led commander, biceps burning as he tried to pin those thrashing claws. Vox's serrated mandibles clacked inches from his face, dripping globs of viscous drool. The ground lurched beneath them, a spiderweb of fissures spreading out from the impact site of the listing pack-led cruiser. Soldiers of both sides staggered and stumbled, fighting to keep their footing on the heaving, fracturing surface. Our pack-led warrior, plasma rifle clutched tight, took one step too many. The crumbling rock gave way and he plummeted, screeching, into a widening chasm. Nearby, a human trooper lunged to save a comrade, only for both to vanish as the hungry moon swallowed them whole. Roger and Vox rolled, heedless of the unfolding destruction, intent only on crushing the life from the other. Vox ripped free a hand, scything it toward Roger's exposed throat, but the human caught his wrist, snarling with effort as he forced it back. A concussive tremor blasted them apart, Roger's grip slipping. He hit the ground hard, the breath driven from his lungs. Gasping, he staggered upright, eyes widening as he saw the extent of the spreading devastation. "Fall back! Get to the evac ship!" Roger's bellow cut through the chaos. "This whole moon is coming apart." Humans scrambled over the disintegrating terrain, hauling their wounded between them. Behind them the Warmounts bellowed in distress, their massive frames ill-suited to the treacherous footing. One of the rhino-like behemoths slipped, a leg plunging into a sudden rift. It thrashed and roared, trying to pull free before slipping from view, its anguished cries swallowed by the depths. Vox scuttled toward the pack-led cruiser, zigzagging between erupting geysers of toxic gas and storms of razor rock shrapnel. At the top of the boarding ramp, he risked a glance back. His soldiers were in full rout, consumed by the seismic upheaval they'd made no effort to escape. The cruiser's engines coughed to life, and Vox flung himself aboard, just as the landing gear lifted from the braking ground. Groaning, the cruiser lurched skyward, fighting to escape the moon's gravitational pull as its surface collapsed beneath it. Roger, aboard the human ship, watched through the viewport as the Pakled vessel struggled to ascend, its hull pitted and scored by the flying debris. For a moment it seemed to rise, clawing for the stars, before shuddering and flipping stern over bow. It dropped, plunging back into the roiling maelstrom of the dying moon. A blinding flash seared Roger's retinas as the cruiser's reactor breached, a wave of searing light and debris washing outward as it detonated on impact. The explosion ripped through the fragmented crust, the shockwave setting off a cascading chain of seismic collapse. Through slitted eyes, Roger saw the moon shatter, spinning fragments of itself out into the void as it crumbled inward, its structural integrity destroyed. In moments, all that remained was a slowly dissipating cloud of pulverized rock where a celestial body once hung. Roger sagged back, breath ragged, scarcely believing the evidence of his own eyes. The battle was over, the moon was no more, and somewhere in that drifting shroud of debris, Vox was nothing but atomized dust. It should have been a moment of triumph, but as the human ship limped away through the silent stars, Roger tasted only ashes. How many more worlds would have to die before this war was done? As Roger's battered ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, his stomach clenched at the sight of the devastation below. Smoke billowed from ruined cities, the twisted wreckage of vehicles and buildings littering the cratered streets. The Warmounts, once humanity's greatest weapon, now rampaged unchecked, leaving only destruction in their wake. The ship touched down on a rubble-strewn landing pad, the impact jarring Roger to his bones. He stumbled down the ramp, his troops close behind, their faces etched with the same shell-shocked horror he knew must be mirrored on his own. Dr. Novak strode forward to meet them, her lab coat stained with soot and blood. Her eyes, once alight with the thrill of scientific discovery, now blazed with fury and accusation. "Look around you, Colonel," she spat, gesturing to the ruined cityscape. "See what your monsters have wrought. This is the price of your arrogance, your reckless disregard for the dangers I warned you about." Roger flinched as if slapped, the weight of his guilt crushing. I never meant for this to happen. I thought we could control them, use them to save humanity." "Well, you were wrong." Dr. Novak's voice was cold, unyielding. "And now we're all paying for it. The Warmounts are out of control, evolving, mutating into nightmares beyond our worst fears. They shrug off bullets, ignore pain, regenerate from the most grievous wounds. We can't stop them." Roger clenched his fists, a spark of determination kindling in his chest. "Then we'll find a way. I'll take my troops, my own Warmounts. We'll hunt them down, one by one if we have to. We'll fix this, I swear it." Dr. Novak opened her mouth to reply, but was cut off by a sudden urgent beeping from her wristcom. She glanced down, her face draining of color. "Oh my God. It's the lunar base. They're detecting a massive energy surge from the moon's debris field. Something's coming." Roger stepped forward, dread coiling in his gut. "Put it on screen." A holographic display flickered to life, showing a jagged chunk of the moon's crust, kilometers wide, hurtling through space on a direct course for Earth. And there, clinging to its surface like a grotesque tumor. The Pakled commander was barely recognizable. His body fused with the twisted metal of his ship, flesh and machine melded in a nightmarish amalgam. His compound eyes blazed with madness and hatred as he rode his improvised meteor bomb towards the planet's surface, a suicidal final strike against the beings who had destroyed his species. Roger watched, numb with horror, as the fragment blazed through the upper atmosphere, friction setting its edges aglow. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that its impact would be an extinction-level event, wiping out all life on Earth in a heartbeat. Unless he stopped it. "Titan!" he barked, and his personal warmount, a behemoth twice the size of an elephant, lumbered forward, steam snorting from its armored nostrils. Roger vaulted into the saddle, the beast's muscles flexing beneath him like steel cables. "We're the only ones who can get close enough," he said grimly, looking to his troops. "We have to stop that thing before it hits, or we're all dead. Mount up and follow me." As his soldiers scrambled to obey, swinging astride their own snarling war mounts, Roger dug his heels into Titan's flanks, the beast surging forward in an avalanche of horned, armored fury. They thundered through the ruined streets, racing the falling sky, the fate of the world resting on their shoulders. But even as they charged to humanity's last desperate defense, Roger saw his war mounts begin to change, their flesh rippling and bulging with grotesque new mutations. Fangs elongated into sabers, horns twisted into cruel scythes, muscle mass doubling, then tripling in size. They were becoming monsters, even as they rode to battle a monster. Roger could only pray their loyalty would last long enough to see the fight through. If not... One way or another, this ended today. The sky blazed with hellish light as the lunar fragment plummeted towards Earth, a screaming herald of the apocalypse. Roger and his remaining troops thundered across the blasted landscape atop their mutating war mounts, the beast's hides rippling and pulsing with unnatural vitality. Choking clouds of ash billowed in their wake, the scorched earth cracking and splitting beneath the war mount's pounding hooves. Maddened with pain, the beasts lashed out at each other with fang and claw, ichor spraying the air in glistening arcs. Roger unslung his rifle and put a round through the skull of a rampaging beast, his heart wrenching as it crumpled. His creation, his responsibility, his failure. The fragment loomed closer, flames sheathing its surface, Vox's twisted form silhouetted against the inferno. His insane laughter cut through the roar of the meteorite, a jagged blade of sound stabbing into Roger's mind. The outcropping jutted up ahead, a raw wound in the earth. Roger spurred Titan onwards, the beast's muscles bunching and straining as it surged up the rocky slope. Massive claws scrabbled for purchase, finding holds where none should be. At the apex, Titan gathered itself and leapt, sailing into the maelstrom, bearing Roger to his final confrontation. The winds howled, buffeting man and mount, whipping at Roger's face, drawing tears from his eyes. Vox loomed before him, a nightmare fusion of flesh and metal, pulsing with malevolent life. Time crystallized into a single perfect moment as they hurtled towards each other, the conclusion to their long and bitter struggle. Roger brought his rifle to bear, finger tightening on the trigger, ready to send Vox screaming into oblivion. Agony lanced through Roger's arm, sudden and searing. He looked down to see a barbed tentacle erupting from Titan's flank, coiling around his wrist like a hungry python. More tendrils burst from the beast's mutating hide, ensnaring Roger's legs, his torso, dragging him down into Titan's writhing bulk. Roger screamed as he felt his flesh flowing like wax, fusing with the monster he rode. Bones popped and splintered, skin split and reformed in new and terrible configurations. The pain was all-consuming, obliterating thought, identity, humanity. Titan's body rippled and elongated, taking on a serpentine aspect as it rammed into Vox with the force of an extinction-level impact. Abomination met abomination in a storm of ruptured flesh and spraying fluids, an indescribable melding of horrors. The merged atrocities, no longer fully Vox or Roger or Titan, but some unimaginable combination of all three, spun away from the screaming meteorite, trailing streamers of liquefied viscera. They fell, locked in a final embrace of mutual destruction, to vanish into the smoke-choked skies as the lunar fragment hurtled past, its world-killing trajectory unaltered by the collision. The shockwave slammed into Dr. Novak's bunker like a titanic hammer blow, the walls shuddering and groaning under the onslaught. Cracks raced across reinforced concrete, dust raining from the ceiling as lights flickered and equipment crashed to the floor. She clung to a support beam, knuckles white as the world shook itself apart. On the monitors, cities crumbled into rubble, skyscrapers toppling like felled trees. Bridges snapped like twigs, highways buckled and split. Tsunamis roared over coastal regions, dragging entire towns into the churning depths. The lunar fragment, shedding molten rock, punched a crater visible from orbit, the impact flattening forests and vaporizing lakes in a heartbeat. In the ruins, packs of feral warmounts rampaged unchecked, their hides pulsing with unnatural mutations. They fell upon fleeing survivors with ravenous hunger, ripping and tearing. The beasts turned on each other, fangs and claws rending flesh, ichor painting the rubble slick and foul. Dr. Novak tore her gaze from the screens, eyes squeezing shut against hot tears of horror and despair. She'd tried to stop this madness, screamed herself hoarse to deaf ears, drunk on dreams of power. Now the world paid the price for their arrogance. A proximity alert dragged her back to the monitors. The feed from camera 81 showed a new crater that had punched through the outskirts of the ruined city above. The edges were still crumbling, belching smoke and dust, but something moved in the debris-choked depths. It emerged in lurching stop motion, a twisted mound of meat and metal pulling itself free of the rubble with a skin-crawling scrape of bone on stone. It was a thing of nightmare, pulsing with wrongness. Not Packled, not human, not warmount, but some blasphemous fusion of all three, held together by threads of sinew and hate. Through rents in its misshapen hide, Dr. Novak glimpsed the fused, screaming faces of Roger and Vox, trapped forever in a rictus of shared agony. Bile scorched her throat as realization crystallized into numb horror. The abomination shrugged off car-sized chunks of rubble, its limbs realigning with wet pops. It swiveled its malformed skull, a grotesque perversion of a head, as if tasting the air. Then it roared, an impossibly loud gurgling bellow that Dr. Novak swore she could feel in her bones even miles away and a half-mile down. The beast started moving, its swollen, lumpy legs eating up the distance with terrifying speed. It crushed abandoned vehicles into flattened ruin, powderized brick and stone to dust beneath each footfall. There was no trace of Roger's rigid military discipline in its motion, nor any hint of Vox's cunning cruelty. Only a relentless sense of purpose, a drive to destroy, to unmake, to subsume all in its path. Dr. Novak sagged against the console, a moan catching in her throat. She'd warned them, goddammit all, she'd warned them. But they hadn't listened, too hungry for victory at any cost, and now that cost had come due, and it was far, far higher than any of them ever could have imagined. The abomination that had once been Roger, Titan, Vox, lumbered towards the heart of the city, an avatar of annihilation, of ending, its bellow shaking the very earth. Dr. Novak knew, with a soul-deep, unshakable dread, that this was only the beginning. That this unstoppable horror of twisted flesh and burning hate would keep going, keep destroying, until it had remade the whole world in its own grotesque image, or until it had reduced everything, everywhere, to ashes and echoes and screams that went on and on and on forever. Dr. Novak hunched over the flickering monitors, her eyes bloodshot and haunted, as she watched the Roger Vox Titan abomination tear through the ruined cityscape, its misshapen limbs pulverized concrete and steel, its guttural roars echoing off the shattered buildings. She flinched as it snatched up a fleeing civilian, the man's screams abruptly silenced as he was crushed into a bloody pulp. With shaking hands, Dr. Novak fumbled open the secure locker, revealing the innocuous black box within. The fail-safe, one press of the button, and it would broadcast a signal that would rewrite the DNA of every warmount on the planet, causing catastrophic cellular breakdown. The monsters would die, agonized and messy, but they would die. And so would any hope of humanity's survival. Dr. Novak hesitated, finger hovering over the activation switch. The warmounts were an abomination, a perversion of science and nature, but they were also the greatest weapons humanity had ever created. Without them, without the genetic knowledge that had birthed them, mankind would be helpless before the next alien threat. On screen, the Roger Vox Titan hybrid smashed through a line of military vehicles, tearing armored personnel carriers in half with its bare hands. Troops scattered, their weapons useless against its impenetrable hide. It was unstoppable, uncontrollable, and it was the key to everything. With a snarl of rage and grief, Dr. Novak slammed the failsafe to the ground. grinding it under her heel until it was nothing but shards and sparking circuitry. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the destruction unfold. Each life snuffed out a damning indictment of her choices. But she would not turn back. Could not. The abomination had to be captured, studied, replicated. Its twisted DNA held the secrets to creating a new breed of warmount, one utterly loyal to her alone. An army of monsters to guard humanity's future, no matter the cost. Dr. Novak turned from the screens, stalking to her workbench. Schematics and calculations littered the surface, designs for containment fields and gene sequences and neural leashes, the tools of a madwoman or a savior. Outside, the world burned, the abomination roared, and in the depths of her bunker, Dr. Novak smiled a brittle, broken smile and set to work. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.